My stepbrother demanded $30,000 wedding gift then tried to take my house, so I kicked out my entire family who were living rent-free for years. I, 33 male, have been living with my father, 58 male, stepmother Olivia, 52 female, and stepbrother Keith, 27 male, in my house for the past few years. My mom passed away from cancer when I was 15, and my dad married Olivia when I was 17. From the very beginning, my relationship with Keith was strained. He never accepted me as part of the family and made it clear that he saw me as an intruder. The problem started right after our parents got married. Keith would deliberately exclude me from family activities, make snide comments about me during family dinners, and even spread rumors about me at school. He told people I was weird and creepy, which made it really hard for me to make friends. One time, he even took my mom's photo from my room and tore it up because he said I was trying too hard to get sympathy from everyone. Whenever these incidents happened, my father never stood up for me. His response was always the same: since I was older, I should be more understanding and let things go. He would say things like, "Keith is just adjusting or he's younger, you need to be more mature about this." This pattern became so predictable that I stopped telling him about Keith's behavior altogether. Despite the difficult home environment, I focused on my studies and got into a good college. I worked hard and became a corporate lawyer. Meanwhile, Keith dropped out of college after 2 years and started working various sales jobs. He never stayed at one place for too long and always blamed others for his failures. 3 years ago, I bought a nice house in an upscale neighborhood. Around the same time, my father's business started struggling. He had invested in a restaurant that wasn't doing well, and they were having trouble paying their bills. One evening, he came to my apartment looking really stressed. He told me about their financial situation and asked if they could move in with me temporarily until things got better. Despite our history, I agreed because I didn't want my father to struggle. At first, things were okay. They moved in, and I let them live rent-free because I knew they were having financial difficulties. Keith had just started a new job as a sales representative at a local company, and his salary wasn't great. My father was trying to save his business, and Olivia had to quit her part-time job to help him. But over time, they started taking advantage of my generosity. They never contributed to any household expenses, not even groceries. Keith would throw parties without asking me and leave the house a mess. When I brought this up, Olivia would say I was being petty about small things. My father would just shrug it off, saying we should all try to get along. Last month, Keith got engaged to his girlfriend Tamara, 26 female. I didn't know her well because I tried to stay out of their way most of the time. One evening, Keith and Olivia cornered me in my home office. They said they needed to discuss something important about the wedding. I expected them to ask for help with wedding expenses, but what they demanded was shocking. They wanted $30,000 as a wedding gift. Their reasoning? Since I made good money and didn't have my own family to support, I should help Keith start his married life. When I refused, Keith lost it. He started yelling about how I had always been selfish and how I was probably jealous because I was still single. Olivia joined in, saying I was being petty and holding on to old grudges. They said since they had been living with me for years, I should consider Keith as my real brother and help him out. I reminded them that they had been living in my house rent-free, and I had never asked them for anything in return. Keith sneered and said that's what family was supposed to do, help each other without expecting anything back. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on me, considering how he had treated me all these years. The argument got heated, and they ended up uninviting me from the wedding. I wasn't bothered because I hadn't planned on attending anyway. Being around Keith and his friends, who all believed his version of what a terrible person I was, wasn't my idea of a good time. My father, true to form, tried to mediate. He came to my room later that night and gave me his usual speech about being the bigger person. He said since I was doing well in life, I should help Keith get started. When I pointed out that Keith had never treated me like a brother, my father accused me of being resentful and holding on to childhood grudges. The wedding was last week. I didn't attend, and from what I heard, it was a small ceremony. Now Keith and Tamara give me dirty looks whenever we cross paths in the house. Olivia has been making passive-aggressive comments about ungrateful people who forget their family obligations. My father keeps trying to bring up the topic of the money again, suggesting I could give a smaller amount if the full $30,000 was too much. I've started thinking about asking them all to move out. The situation is getting uncomfortable, and their sense of entitlement is getting worse. They act like they have a right to my money just because we're technically family, even though they've never treated me like family. Looking back, I realize I probably should have set better boundaries from the start. When they moved in, I should have made it clear that it was temporary and set some ground rules. But I was trying to help my father, and I thought maybe things would be different now that we were all adults. Clearly, I was wrong. Am I the asshole for refusing to give Keith the money? Should I ask them to move out? Update 1. Things have gotten much worse since my last post, and I need to share what happened. The situation has escalated in ways I never expected, and I'm still trying to process everything. Yesterday was absolute chaos. It started when Tamara had a complete meltdown during breakfast. Apparently, she had been talking with her friends about their future plans, and they had asked about where she and Keith were planning to live after settling into married life. That's when everything blew up. Before the wedding, Keith had been telling Tamara that they would be buying their own house soon. He had convinced her that between his savings and the wedding gift money from me, the $30,000 that I refused to give, they would be able to make a down payment on a nice house in a good neighborhood. He had even shown her some properties online and made plans about how they would decorate their new home. When Tamara found out that I had refused to give them the money, and that Keith had basically built their future plans on money he was never guaranteed to receive, she lost it. She started screaming at Keith in front of everyone at the breakfast table. She called him a liar and said she couldn't believe he had deceived her about something so important. But what really got to me was what came next. Tamara revealed that Keith had told her all sorts of things about me, that I was jealous of their relationship, that I had always tried to ruin his life, and that I had some kind of personal vendetta against him. He had apparently painted himself as the victim who had to live under the same roof as his cruel stepbrother who enjoyed watching him struggle. The argument went on for hours. At first, it was just between Keith and Tamara, but then Olivia got involved. Instead of addressing Keith's lies, she started defending him and somehow turned the whole thing around to be my fault. She said if I wasn't so selfish and had just given them the money as a wedding gift, none of this would be happening. Then came the most outrageous part. Keith and Olivia spent the afternoon working on my father, convincing him that since I was single and focused on my career, I didn't really need such a big house. They suggested that I should either give the house to Keith and Tamara or sell it and split the money with Keith so they could buy their own place. Their reasoning was ridiculous. They said since I spent most of my time at work and didn't have a family of my own, I could easily move into an apartment. Keith and Tamara, on the other hand, were planning to start a family soon and needed the space more than I did. Olivia even had the audacity to say that my mother would have wanted me to help my brother this way. To my complete shock, my father actually bought into this nonsense. He came to my home office this morning and tried to convince me that as the elder son, I had a responsibility to help establish my younger brother. He suggested that I should either give the house to Keith or sell it and split the money with him because that's what family does for each other. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The house that I bought with my own money, after years of hard work, they wanted me to just hand over to Keith? When I refused, my father got upset and said I was being selfish. He brought up how I had always been difficult about sharing things with Keith, completely ignoring the fact that Keith had been hostile towards me from day one. The argument got more heated when Olivia joined in. She started saying that my unwillingness to help Keith was probably because I was bitter about being single while Keith had found someone to marry. She said I was trying to ruin Keith's marriage out of jealousy and resentment. All this time, Tamara stood in the background with a smug look on her face, like she had already decided the house would be hers. I reminded them that they had been living in my house rent-free for years, and instead of being grateful, they were now demanding that I give them the house too. I pointed out how Keith had never treated me like family, how he had always been hostile towards me, and how they had all enabled his behavior. But they wouldn't listen. They kept talking over me, saying I was being dramatic about the past and needed to move on. My father even suggested that if I wasn't willing to give them the house, I should at least give them the $30,000 they had originally asked for, plus some extra to help with the down payment on their own place. I'm absolutely furious. Not only do they want me to give them $30,000, but now they want my house too? The entitlement is unbelievable. They've been living here rent-free, not contributing to any expenses, and still have the audacity to make these demands. I've decided that I need to take action, but I'm still figuring out what to do. The situation has become unbearable, and I can't continue living like this. I never thought my own family would try to manipulate me into giving up my house, but here we are. I'll update again once I decide what to do. Update 2. Well, I finally did it. After days of constant harassment about giving up my house, I'd had enough. Yesterday morning, I served them all with an eviction notice. I told them they had 30 days to find a new place and move out. The past week had been unbearable. Every day, they would find new ways to pressure me about the house. Keith and Tamara would deliberately talk loudly about house hunting in front of me, making comments about how impossible it was to find anything in their budget. Olivia would leave real estate listings on my desk, all for small apartments, with notes saying this would be perfect for you. My father was the worst. He kept trying to corner me when I came home from work, always starting with I've been thinking about the house situation. He even called some of our relatives and told them about the situation, conveniently leaving out the part about them living rent-free in my house for years. Some of these relatives started calling me, trying to convince me to do the right thing. The final straw came yesterday morning. I came down for breakfast to find Tamara and Keith measuring my living room walls. When I asked what they were doing, Tamara said they were planning where to put their furniture when they moved in properly. They were acting like it was already decided that the house would be theirs. I went straight to my home office, called my lawyer, and had him draw up eviction notices for all of them. When I served them the papers at dinner, the reaction was explosive. Keith jumped up from his chair and started yelling, calling me every name in the book. He said I was heartless, selfish, and that I would regret this. Tamara broke down crying, saying I was ruining their lives and their marriage before it had even properly started. Olivia tried to guilt-trip me by saying they had nowhere to go. She brought up how they had been a family for years and how my mother would be ashamed of me for throwing them out. That last comment really showed me how low they were willing to go. My father just sat there in shock at first. Then he started with his usual speech about family obligations and being the bigger person. But this time, I wasn't having it. I reminded them that they had been living in my house rent-free for years, and instead of being grateful, they had demanded more and more. I told them how Keith had always treated me badly, from the day our parents got married. I brought up all the times he had deliberately excluded me, broken my things, and made my life difficult. I reminded them how they had all enabled his behavior, my father with his be the bigger person speeches, and Olivia by always defending Keith no matter what he did. When my father tried to intervene again, I told him he was just as guilty. He had always forced me to compromise while letting Keith do whatever he wanted. I said I was done being the family doormat. They spent the whole day trying different tactics to make me change my mind. Olivia even tried to threaten me, saying she would tell everyone in the family how cruel I was being. I just laughed and told her to go ahead, I had nothing to hide. Keith and Tamara switched between crying, begging, and making threats. Keith even tried to claim that since they had been living here for years, they had tenant rights and I couldn't just throw them out. I reminded him that he had never paid rent and there was no lease agreement. By evening, they seemed to realize I wasn't going to back down. They've been giving me the silent treatment since then, which is actually a nice change from the constant harassment. I've made it clear that they have 30 days to find a new place, and I won't be changing my mind. I know some people might think I'm being harsh, but I'm done letting them take advantage of me. They pushed too far with demanding my house, and now they're facing the consequences. I'll update again once they've moved out. Update 3. They finally moved out last week, and I need to share what happened during their last days here and after they left. The past month has been stressful, but I'm glad I stood my ground. During their last month in my house, they tried everything to change my mind. My father kept trying to negotiate, suggesting they could stay if they paid rent, but I wasn't interested. Keith and Tamara alternated between ignoring me completely and trying to make my life difficult by being loud late at night or inviting their friends over. Olivia took it upon herself to call every family member and tell them how cruel I was being. She even contacted some of my mother's relatives, trying to use them to guilt trip me. But it backfired when these relatives asked for the full story and I explained everything, about them living rent-free, demanding $30,000, and then trying to take my house. A week before they were supposed to move out, they tried one last tactic. Keith started acting nice to me, trying to reminisce about good times we supposedly had together. Tamara suddenly started cleaning the house and cooking dinners. My father attempted to bond with me by bringing up memories of my mother. But I could see through all of it. They finally moved to Tamara's parents' house last week. The moving day was dramatic, as expected. They took their time, making multiple trips and leaving the house in a mess. Keith made sure to tell me that I would regret this decision for the rest of my life. Tamara cried about how I had ruined their dreams of starting a family in a nice house. Olivia gave me a long speech about karma, and my father just looked disappointed. After they left, I discovered they had caused some damage to the house out of spite. There were holes in some walls that had been covered by pictures, scratches on the hardwood floors that had been hidden under rugs, and some of my personal items were missing. I've documented everything but decided not to pursue it legally. I just want to be done with them. The aftermath has been interesting. Some relatives have tried to convince me to let them come back, saying family should stick together. But when I explain the whole situation, most people actually understand my position. Even some of my father's friends have told me privately that I did the right thing. Keith and Tamara have been badmouthing me to anyone who will listen. They've been posting on social media about how I destroyed their marriage and future plans. Some people believe them, but most can see through their manipulation, especially since they've never mentioned living in my house rent-free or demanding money in the house from me. My father still tries to call occasionally, probably to guilt trip me again, but I've blocked all their numbers. I've heard through relatives that Keith and Tamara are struggling to adjust to living with her parents, and there's already tension in their new marriage. Apparently, Tamara's parents aren't too happy about the situation either. The house feels peaceful now. I've repaired the damage they caused and redecorated some rooms. I've realized that sometimes cutting toxic family members out of your life is the best thing you can do for yourself. I don't regret my decision at all. If anything, I regret not doing it sooner. Some people have suggested I should try to reconcile with them, but I'm done. They showed their true colors, and I've finally learned to put myself first. Sometimes the family you're born into, or step into, isn't worth keeping in your life.